My sister stole my fiancé. I married her crush a week later, and watching her face crumble at my wedding was worth every sleepless night I spent planning it. The memory of that moment still sends electricity through my veins, but let me start from the beginning, from the day my entire world shattered like glass against concrete. It was a Tuesday morning in March when I found them. I remember because Tuesdays were always our coffee dates, mine and Jake's before he left for his business trips. I'd driven to his apartment with his favorite blueberry muffins from the bakery downtown, my engagement ring catching the morning light as I fumbled with my keys. The spare key he'd given me 6 months ago, the one that symbolized trust and forever and all those beautiful lies. The door clicked open with the same soft sound it always made, but something felt different. Wrong. The air was thick with an unfamiliar perfume, sweet and cloying, nothing like the vanilla body spray I wore. My chest tightened, that first whisper of intuition that something was terribly, devastatingly off. I should have called out, should have announced myself like I always did. But my feet moved silently across the hardwood floor, drawn by sounds from the bedroom that made my stomach clench with dread. Soft laughter. A giggle I recognized but couldn't place. The creak of bed springs. My hand trembled as I pushed the bedroom door open just a crack. There they were. Jake? My Jake. The man I was supposed to marry in 3 months, tangled in sheets with long auburn hair spilling across his chest. Hair I'd braided countless times as children. Hair that belonged to my sister Emma. The muffin box slipped from my numb fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud that seemed to echo like thunder in my ears. They didn't hear it. They were too lost in each other, too consumed by their betrayal to notice the world crumbling around them. I watched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Watched my sister's hands explore the body that was supposed to be mine. Watched Jake whisper things into her ear that made her laugh, that same tinkling laugh she'd had since we were kids. The same laugh that used to make me smile now felt like acid in my veins. My breathing became shallow, rapid. The room spun slightly, colors bleeding at the edges of my vision. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. Not Jake, not Emma, not my sister, who'd been my maid of honor, who'd helped me pick out my wedding dress just 2 weeks ago. I backed away from the door, my body moving on autopilot while my mind reeled. Each step felt like walking through quicksand. The apartment that had been my second home for 2 years suddenly felt foreign, hostile. Every picture of us together on the walls seemed to mock me. Every shared memory felt contaminated. I made it to the living room before the first sob escaped. It came from somewhere deep inside, a sound I'd never heard myself make before. Raw and broken and completely involuntary. I pressed my hand to my mouth, desperate to contain the sound, to maintain some shred of dignity even though no one was watching. The evidence was everywhere once I started looking. Emma's purse on the kitchen counter. Her shoes by the door, the expensive red heels she'd worn to dinner just last week when she'd sat across from Jake and me, asking about wedding plans with such convincing enthusiasm. Her phone charger plugged into the wall, suggesting this wasn't a one-time thing. How long had this been going on? How many times had I called her to complain about Jake working late, only to have her comfort me while she was probably texting him? How many family dinners had they sat through, making eye contact across the table while I remained obliviously happy? The questions came like a flood, each one more painful than the last. I sank onto Jake's couch, the same couch where we'd planned our honeymoon just 3 days ago, and let the reality crash over me in waves. My sister. My baby sister, who I'd protected from bullies in school, who I'd lent money to when she was struggling, who I'd trusted with every secret I'd ever had. She'd been sleeping with my fiancé, maybe for weeks, maybe for months. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. It was like having my heart carved out while I was still conscious, still breathing, still expected to function. The wedding was in 12 weeks. The invitations had been sent. The dress was hanging in my closet, still wrapped in plastic, waiting for the happiest day of my life. I don't know how long I sat there staring at the wall, trying to make sense of the senseless. The sounds from the bedroom had quieted, and I heard the shower running. Soon they would come out, and I would have to face them. I would have to look at their faces and see the truth I'd been blind to. But something strange happened as I sat there in the wreckage of my life. The crushing pain began to shift, to crystallize into something harder, colder, something that felt like determination. I thought about Emma's face when she'd tried on my veil last month, spinning in front of the mirror in my bedroom while I watched, thinking she was just being silly. I thought about how she'd insisted on helping with the seating chart, how she'd volunteered to handle the music playlist, how she'd known every detail of my wedding because she'd been planning to steal it all along. And then I thought about Marcus. Marcus Chen, Emma's college crush who'd recently moved back to town. Marcus, who'd been asking mutual friends about Emma for months. Marcus, who'd made it clear he was still interested despite her always being too busy to return his calls. Marcus, who just happened to be successful, attractive, and everything Emma had ever claimed to want in a man. The shower was still running when I quietly left the apartment, closing the door behind me with the same soft click. I didn't take the spare key. I'd never need it again. The drive home was a blur of tears and traffic lights. I kept expecting to fall apart completely, to pull over and sob until I couldn't breathe. Instead, I felt oddly calm, like I was watching myself from outside my body. Maybe this was shock. Maybe this was what happened when betrayal cut so deep it severed something essential inside you. I parked in my driveway and sat for a moment, looking at the house I'd grown up in, the house where Emma and I had shared secrets and dreams and painted each other's nails. The house where she'd helped me plan a wedding she was apparently planning to destroy. My phone buzzed. A text from Jake. "Miss you, baby. Can't wait to see you tonight." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Then I opened my contacts and found Marcus's number. We'd exchanged numbers at a mutual friend's party last month. Emma had been there, had watched him give me his card with barely concealed annoyance. She'd made some comment about how he was just networking, how he gave his number to everyone. But I'd seen the way he looked at her, the way he'd asked about her all evening. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. What was I doing? What was I about to do? I thought about Emma's laugh in Jake's bed. I thought about her hands on his chest. I thought about 3 months of wedding planning that had all been a lie. I typed, "Hi Marcus, it's Sarah, Emma's sister. I was wondering if you might be free for coffee tomorrow. I have something I think you'd want to hear." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The response came back within minutes. "Sarah!" "Of course. Is everything okay? You sound serious." "Everything's fine," I typed back. "Just some family stuff I thought you should know about. Nothing bad, just information." We made plans to meet at the coffee shop downtown, the same one where Jake and I had our Tuesday morning dates. The irony wasn't lost on me. That evening, Jake showed up at my door with flowers and that smile that used to make my heart race. Now it just made me sick. He kissed me hello, and I tasted lies on his lips. I tasted my sister's betrayal and wondered how I'd never noticed it before. How had I missed the signs? How had I been so naive? We ordered takeout and watched a movie, the same domestic routine we'd had for 2 years. Jake's arm around my shoulders, my head on his chest, listening to the heartbeat that had betrayed me. He was so normal, so perfectly himself, that I almost wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. But I hadn't. The image of Emma's auburn hair on his pillow was burned into my retinas. The sound of her laughter in his bedroom echoed in my ears. I went through the motions of normalcy because I wasn't ready to confront them yet. I needed time to plan, to think, to figure out exactly how I wanted this to play out. Revenge was a dish best served cold, wasn't it? And I was discovering I had a taste for it. The next morning, I met Marcus at the coffee shop. He was already there when I arrived, looking nervous and concerned in a way that made my chest tight. He was handsome in a quiet way, with dark hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. The kind of man who sent flowers on first dates and remembered your birthday. The kind of man Emma had always claimed to want, but never seemed to appreciate when she had him. I ordered my usual latte and sat across from him, trying to figure out how to begin. How do you tell someone that the woman they're interested in is sleeping with your fiancé? How do you weaponize someone's feelings without completely destroying them? Marcus leaned forward, his brow furrowed with concern. The worry in his eyes was so genuine it made me feel guilty for what I was about to do, but not guilty enough to stop. I told him everything. About finding them together, about the wedding planning, about how long it had probably been going on. I watched his face change as the words sank in, saw the hurt and disappointment settle into his features like sediment. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. Finally, he looked up at me with something like wonder in his eyes. Not wonder at Emma's betrayal, but wonder at something else entirely. He told me he'd always found me interesting. That he'd wanted to ask me out when we first met, but I'd been engaged and Emma had made it clear she was interested in him. He'd chosen to pursue Emma because she was available and because she was beautiful and vibrant and everything he thought he wanted. But sitting there, listening to me, seeing the strength it took to handle such a devastating betrayal with such grace, he realized he'd been interested in the wrong sister all along. I hadn't expected that. I'd expected sympathy, maybe some shared anger. I hadn't expected him to look at me like I was something precious that had been hiding in plain sight. The conversation shifted, became something deeper. We talked about Emma, about Jake, about betrayal and trust and how people could be so different from who you thought they were. But we also talked about other things, about our jobs, our dreams, our fears, about the books we'd read and the places we wanted to travel. Hours passed without me noticing. The coffee shop filled and emptied around us, and still we talked. There was something easy about being with Marcus, something that felt natural and right in a way that my relationship with Jake never had, even in the beginning. When we finally left, Marcus walked me to my car. He hesitated for a moment, then asked if I wanted to have dinner the next night. Not as revenge against Emma, not as a way to get back at Jake, but because he wanted to spend more time with me. I said yes. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the day, about the way Marcus had looked at me, about the conversation that had flowed so naturally between us. For the first time since I'd found Jake and Emma together, I felt something other than rage or hurt. I felt possibility. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Sweet dreams, beautiful. Love you." I turned the phone face down and went to sleep. The next few days passed in a strange duality. During the day, I went through the motions of my normal life. I went to work, I answered calls from the wedding planner, I smiled and nodded when people asked about the preparations. But underneath it all, I was planning something else entirely. My dates with Marcus became a regular thing. We met for coffee, for lunch, for long walks in the park. He was everything Jake wasn't. Attentive, thoughtful, genuinely interested in what I had to say. He made me laugh, really laugh, for the first time in months, maybe years. I found myself looking forward to seeing him with an anticipation that felt both thrilling and terrifying. Was this what it was supposed to feel like? This easy comfort mixed with electric attraction? This sense that I could be completely myself without pretense or performance? Meanwhile, Emma continued to text me about wedding preparations, her messages full of exclamation points and fake enthusiasm. She wanted to know about the final dress fitting, about the bachelor party Jake was planning, about whether I needed help with any last-minute details. Each message felt like a knife twisting in my chest, but I responded normally, kept up the pretense that everything was fine. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I was still planning, still deciding exactly how I wanted this to play out. Jake continued to be the perfect fiancé on the surface. He brought me flowers, took me to dinner, talked about our honeymoon plans with convincing enthusiasm. But I started noticing things I'd missed before. The way he checked his phone constantly, the way he was suddenly working late more often, the way he seemed distracted during conversations, like part of his mind was always somewhere else, or with someone else. It was during one of these dinners, while Jake was in the bathroom and checking his phone for the third time in an hour, that I made my decision. I was going to marry Marcus. The thought came to me fully formed, crystal clear and completely shocking. I was going to marry Marcus, and I was going to do it before my scheduled wedding date with Jake. I was going to steal Emma's crush the same way she'd stolen my fiancé, but I was going to do it better, more completely, more devastatingly. And I was going to make sure she knew exactly what she'd lost. When Jake returned to the table, I smiled at him with the same bright expression I'd been wearing for weeks. He had no idea that I'd just decided to destroy his life the same way he'd destroyed mine. That weekend, Marcus and I went to the art museum downtown. We spent hours wandering through the galleries, talking about the paintings, sharing stories about our childhoods, our families, our dreams. He had this way of listening that made me feel like everything I said was important, like my thoughts and opinions mattered in a way they never had with Jake. We were standing in front of a painting of a woman in a blue dress when Marcus took my hand. It was such a simple gesture, but it sent warmth spreading through my entire body. His hand was warm and strong and steady, nothing like Jake's restless fingers that were always tapping or fidgeting or reaching for his phone. He looked at me with those kind eyes and told me he was falling for me. That he knew the timing was complicated, that he knew I was dealing with a lot, but he couldn't pretend his feelings weren't real. I kissed him right there in the museum, surrounded by centuries of art and beauty and love. It was soft and sweet and perfect, nothing like the desperate, performative kisses I'd been sharing with Jake. This felt real. This felt right. When we broke apart, Marcus rested his forehead against mine and whispered that he loved me. Not my sister, not some idealized version of me, but me. The real me, with all my flaws and complications and current emotional disasters. I told him I loved him too, and meant it with a certainty that shocked me. How was this possible? How had I found real love in the middle of such devastating betrayal? That night, I started planning the wedding. Not the one I'd been planning with Jake, but a real one. A small ceremony, intimate and beautiful, and everything I'd actually wanted before I'd gotten caught up in Emma's ideas about what a wedding should be. I called my cousin Rebecca, who was a wedding planner in the city. I told her I needed her help with something urgent and confidential. I told her I was calling off one wedding and planning another, and I needed it done in 2 weeks. Rebecca was shocked but professionally adaptable. She asked if I was sure, if I knew what I was doing, if I understood the implications. I told her I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. Within days, she'd found us a venue, a small garden restaurant with fairy lights and climbing roses. She'd arranged for a photographer, a small string quartet, flowers that were simple and elegant. Everything Jake's and my wedding wasn't. I invited only the people who mattered most. My best friend from college, a few close friends from work, my grandmother who'd always been my biggest supporter, and Emma. I made sure to invite Emma. The invitation was hand-delivered, beautiful cream cardstock with elegant script. It read, "Sarah and Marcus request the pleasure of your company at their wedding celebration." The date was 1 week before my scheduled wedding to Jake. I can only imagine Emma's face when she opened it. The confusion, the panic, the desperate need to understand what was happening. She called me immediately, of course, but I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail, then deleted the message without listening to it. Jake called too, multiple times. I ignored those calls as well. Let them wonder. Let them panic. Let them realize that their perfect little secret was about to be exposed in the most public way possible. The week before the wedding was a blur of preparation and anticipation. Marcus and I spent every free moment together, and I fell deeper in love with him every day. He was patient with my emotional swings, understanding about the complexity of the situation, supportive in ways that Jake had never been. He asked me once if I was sure this wasn't just revenge, if I was marrying him for the right reasons. I told him the truth, that revenge might have brought us together, but love was keeping us together. That I'd never felt more certain about anything in my life. The day before the wedding, Emma finally cornered me. She showed up at my apartment, looking haggard and desperate in a way I'd never seen before. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged, her hands shaking. She demanded to know what I was doing, what I thought I was accomplishing. She tried to convince me that I was making a mistake, that I was acting out of hurt and anger, that I'd regret it. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. This woman who'd shared my childhood, who'd been my confidant and best friend, who'd betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. I told her I knew about Jake. I told her I'd known for weeks, and I'd been planning this ever since. I told her that she was welcome to have him, that they deserved each other, that I'd found someone better. The color drained from her face. She tried to deny it, then to explain it, then to justify it. She told me it just happened, that they didn't mean for it to happen, that it was complicated. I laughed, a sound that surprised us both with its coldness. Nothing about this was complicated. She'd wanted what I had, so she'd taken it. Now I was taking what she wanted. She left that night in tears, and I felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no second thoughts, no sisterly concern, just cold, perfect satisfaction. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, with the kind of golden light that made everything look like a fairy tale. I woke up early, had coffee on my balcony, and felt more at peace than I had in months. My grandmother came to help me get ready, bringing the pearl earrings she'd worn at her own wedding 60 years ago. She didn't ask questions about Jake or Emma or the sudden change in plans. She just told me I looked radiant, and that she was proud of me for choosing happiness over obligation. The dress was simple but elegant. Nothing like the elaborate gown hanging in my closet that I'd chosen for Jake's wedding. This one was perfect for me. For the woman I'd become, for the life I was choosing to build with Marcus. When I arrived at the venue, my heart nearly stopped. It was more beautiful than I'd even imagined. The garden was in full bloom, the fairy lights twinkled like stars, and the string quartet was playing soft, romantic music that made the whole scene feel magical. Marcus was waiting for me at the altar, looking handsome in his dark suit and absolutely glowing with happiness. When he saw me, his face lit up in a way that made my chest tight with emotion. This was what love looked like. This was what I'd been missing all those years with Jake. As I walked toward him, I scanned the small crowd of guests. My friends were there, smiling and crying happy tears. My grandmother was beaming. And there, in the back, was Emma. She looked terrible. Her face was pale and drawn, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She was wearing a black dress that seemed inappropriate for a wedding, but perfectly appropriate for a funeral, which, in a way, this was the funeral of her hopes, her plans, her assumption that she could take whatever she wanted without consequences. Next to her, looking equally stricken, was Jake. He'd come as her date, apparently. How fitting. I smiled at them both, a bright, genuine smile that I knew would cut deeper than any words could. Then I turned my attention to Marcus, to the man I was about to marry, to the life I was about to begin. The ceremony was perfect. Small and intimate and filled with love. Marcus's vows made me cry, and mine made him cry, and when we kissed as husband and wife, I felt like I was finally, truly home. During the reception, I made sure to mingle with all the guests, to laugh and dance and celebrate. I was genuinely happy, happier than I'd ever been, but I also made sure Emma could see it. I made sure she could see how effortlessly Marcus and I fit together, how natural our connection was, how completely and utterly in love we were. She and Jake left early, slipping out during the dancing like the cowards they were. I watched them go with complete satisfaction. Let them return to their borrowed apartment and their stolen relationship. Let them try to build something real on a foundation of lies and betrayal. I had something better. I had something real. The honeymoon was everything I'd dreamed it would be. Marcus and I traveled to Italy, spending 2 weeks exploring ancient cities and eating incredible food and falling deeper in love every day. We talked about our future, about the children we wanted to have, about the life we were going to build together. I barely thought about Emma or Jake. They seemed like characters from someone else's story, people I'd known in a different life. My real life was just beginning. When we returned home, the aftermath was waiting for us. Jake had called off our wedding, obviously, and was now dealing with the fallout of that decision. The deposits lost, the explanations owed, the family drama that ensued when the truth came out. Emma was facing her own consequences. Mutual friends had chosen sides, and most of them had chosen mine. The story had spread through our social circle like wildfire, and she was now known as the woman who'd stolen her sister's fiancé. It wasn't a reputation that was easy to live with. They'd moved in together, Jake and Emma, probably because they had no choice. Their secret was out, their relationships with their families were strained, and they only had each other. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. But then I remembered Emma's laugh in Jake's bed, and the feeling passed. Marcus and I settled into married life with an ease that still amazed me. We bought a house together, a charming craftsman with a big backyard and room for the family we were planning. We hosted dinner parties and went on weekend trips, and built the kind of life I'd always dreamed of but never quite achieved with Jake. The best part was how effortless it all felt. With Jake, everything had been a struggle: communication, compromise, even affection. With Marcus, it all flowed naturally. We fit together like puzzle pieces, complementing each other's strengths and supporting each other's weaknesses. 6 months after our wedding, I ran into Emma at the grocery store. She looked thin and tired, with dark circles under her eyes and a brittleness to her smile that suggested things weren't going well in her stolen paradise. She tried to make small talk, asking about Marcus and our new house. I answered politely but coolly, giving her nothing more than basic courtesy. When she asked if we could talk sometime, if we could maybe work things out, I simply said no. There was nothing to work out. She'd made her choice and I'd made mine. The difference was that my choice had led to happiness, while hers had led to isolation and regret. As I walked away from her, I felt a final surge of satisfaction. Not the hot, urgent satisfaction of revenge, but the quiet, lasting satisfaction of justice. She'd taken my fiancé, but in doing so, she'd freed me to find something better. She'd destroyed our relationship, but she'd also destroyed her own reputation and future. Most importantly, she'd lost Marcus. The man she'd wanted, the man she'd been too proud or too greedy to appreciate when she had the chance. Now he was mine, completely and utterly mine, and she would have to live with that knowledge for the rest of her life. That night, I told Marcus about the encounter. He held me close and told me he was proud of how I'd handled it, how I'd managed to take the high road while still protecting myself. He told me he loved me more every day and that he was grateful Emma had been too foolish to see what she could have had with him. I kissed him and told him I was grateful too. Grateful for Emma's betrayal, grateful for Jake's weakness, grateful for the pain that had led me to real love. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us are actually the best things in disguise. A year later, Marcus and I were expecting our first child. We were painting the nursery when my phone rang. It was my grandmother, calling with news that shouldn't have surprised me, but somehow did. Emma and Jake had broken up. Their relationship, built on deception and stolen moments, had crumbled under the weight of reality. They'd tried to make it work, but without the thrill of secrecy and the rush of forbidden love, they'd discovered they didn't actually like each other very much. Emma had moved back in with our parents, tail between her legs, reputation in tatters. Jake had moved across the country apparently, starting over somewhere no one knew his story. I felt nothing when I heard the news. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even pity. Just nothing. They were irrelevant to my life now, footnotes in a story that had moved on to much better chapters. That evening, as Marcus and I sat on our couch planning names for our baby, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. A year and a half ago, I'd been planning a wedding to the wrong man, trusting the wrong people, living the wrong life. Now I was married to my soulmate, expecting our first child, surrounded by people who loved and supported me. I had everything I'd ever wanted, everything I'd thought I'd lost when I found Jake and Emma together. The revenge had been sweet, yes, but it had been brief. The real victory was this: the life I'd built, the love I'd found, the happiness that grew stronger every day. Emma had taken my fiancé, thinking she was taking my future. Instead, she'd given me a better one. I married her crush a week later and lived happily ever after. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about building something so beautiful that their betrayal becomes the best thing that ever happened to you. As I fell asleep that night, Marcus's hand resting on my growing belly, I smiled at the irony of it all. Emma had wanted to steal my happiness, but she'd ended up giving me more than I'd ever imagined possible. She'd wanted to ruin my life, but she'd actually saved it. Thank you, Emma, for being exactly who you were, for showing me exactly what I deserved, for setting me free to find it. The best revenge, I'd learned, wasn't getting even, it was getting better. And I had gotten so much better than I'd ever dreamed possible.